What I have here is a Husqvarna YTH 22V46 riding lawnmower, and I'm just gonna go over some background information here just to give an idea of what I typically have to do every year, and I've been doing it for the last 4 years. So our property is about 2 acres. There's some additional property over that way. There's all this down here, all the way over that way, plus all this here up to there, and then there's some up here on this hill that's part of our property, and it's about 2 acres. So every time I mow or do any work on the yard, there's basically the backyard, the side yard, and the upper yard that has to be done. And right now it is early spring, so what I need to do is, now that the grass has grown somewhat, I'm going to dethatch it with this Strongway dethatcher, and then after I get done with that, I will aerate it. You may be able to tell, or maybe you can't, but from up there to all the way down there to the bottom of the yard is a 19-degree slope, so it makes things more complicated to get done. You know, for example, when I aerate, if there's a strong rain shortly after aerating, all the holes that are created by the aerator fill up very quickly with dirt sediment. But that's only in the early spring, and as the grass grows and gets thicker, I can aerate and not have so many issues with the dirt filling the holes. Another issue I have is, you know, every winter when the grass pretty much dies off and there's a lot of winter rain, the rain washes up a lot of rocks. Every winter when the grass does die off, we get a lot of bald spots, and you can kind of see some around. So right over there, right here, right there, over there, they're everywhere. There's bald spots, and during the winter those spots just completely get bald, wash up, and washes dirt down the yard, and it takes a little while in the spring for the grass to grow back. These areas have been seeded, but for some reason it just, every winter these spots become bald. Now what I'm getting ready to do is dethatch, and this is a Strongway dethatcher. It's 48 inches wide. It does a pretty good job. There's no reason to put very large bricks on the dethatcher. In fact, if you put full-size cinder blocks on here, it's too much weight for the slope that I have to go up and down. And because my yard is sloped, I have to go straight up and straight down. I can't go sideways because the tractor may roll. And then, as you can see right there, is a pair of vice grips, because there's nothing that locks the handle in place. So as you're traveling with it, it unfortunately comes unlocked, the handle, and it just basically starts dethatching wherever it wants to. So the vice grips keep it from doing that, and also by putting the vice grips on it, it keeps it up higher. You can get around the yard okay. I do think that the tires are a little narrow. I think they need to be out further for better support. I haven't had too many problems, but it works okay. That is a homemade pin on the hitch right there. I do have a homemade bracket that goes on there, because the one thing I don't like is, between using the dethatcher and the aerator, or pulling a wagon full of tools to do stuff around the yard, is the hitch is kind of getting beat up. But with the homemade bracket on there, it takes all that stress off the hitch and the box back here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with dethatching my lawn. Number one reason why I'm dethatching right now is because it is the perfect time in early spring when your grass is growing to dethatch it to promote better growth. And also, I'm doing this specifically today because it just rained 2 days ago, and it's always best to dethatch when the dirt is moist. So I've got that. And then I also forgot to mention two other things. One is that we have a serious vole, not mole, vole problem in our yard. It's April 16th or 17th today, and in March is when voles have their babies, and they have lots of them. And so March, April, May, our lawn gets heavily tunneled by the voles, and the voles basically eat the roots of anything in your lawn. They also, I believe they eat grubs as well, or maybe the moles that eat grubs. I've only seen one mole. That doesn't mean there isn't more, but the majority are voles, because I've caught a couple, and I've also had yard tools that have taken care of a few voles. And then also we have two dogs, and they have both found voles. They didn't eat them. They just like playing with them. So I just remembered the other thing that I wanted to talk about. So another reason why I do the dethatching is because you can see here we have a lot of moss that grows on our property, and of course wherever the moss grows, the grass doesn't grow. And for the amount of moss that we have, it is a super huge task to rake out all this moss. And we can't really use any chemicals because, well, and even if we did, we'd probably use something that's organic, which more than likely won't work. But there is a spring that runs down this little creek right here, and then also over there is a larger stream. So if we use any chemicals, they'll wash down the hill and go into the water, so we can't do that. So this moss has to be removed by raking it out or using the dethatcher. The dethatcher does not get it all, but the good thing is what it does get, once it becomes disconnected, it'll die off. But as long as it's still in contact with the ground, it will continue to grow. And apparently moss is self-feeding, so it's just going to keep on going. I always thought moss was a result of not getting enough sun exposure, so moss grows, but that's not the case. Our case, I mean, the sun does have something to do with it, but the main reason why this moss grows is because the soil is compacted. It's very, very solid, so it's promoting the growth of moss throughout our entire yard. It actually used to be worse. That was when we had 16 black walnut trees that used to cover most of this area here. They were all cut down and the stumps and the roots were removed, but there used to be a whole lot more moss. The dethatcher will help with some of it, and then hopefully as I mow, I will get a lot of the moss to come up when I mow. The dethatcher only loosens the moss, and in some cases I'll have to get out here with the rake and rake some of it up, as I've done already. And a lot of the moss that does get pulled up, it goes into that compost pile right here. You know, since I did mention that this ground is pretty compacted, right after I get through using the dethatcher, well, the next step I'll take is use the aerator to again enhance, promote the lawn growing. And if I don't get a lot of this moss out, the grass won't grow. And I'll come out here, and once I get an idea of what areas aren't gonna grow too fast, which is probably this area here, this area here, and there's several other areas, I'll probably have to do some overseeding to get the grass to grow. I don't know every type of grass that's in this yard, but it's evident there are different types of grass just because of the way the grass grows. And I can see that there's some tall fescue, some bluegrass, and there's some other types in different spots around the yard. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the yard being compacted, which was contributing to the moss, and you know, the sun has a little bit to do with it, but it's more about the compaction of the ground. But the biggest contributing factor to the moss is the grasses, or the ground's inability to drain off the water from rain. So because it's so compacted, the water typically just stays, I mean, it'll roll downhill, but because it's so compacted, it'll sit in all these little nooks and crannies, and that's what promotes the growth of the moss. The unfortunate part of dethatching on a hillside, or in our case a 19-degree slope, is right after you finish dethatching, it is, at least with this tractor and these types of tires, it is almost impossible to drive on. It just peels out. So as I do this, I have to avoid the areas that are dethatched, especially because how moist the ground is. The tractor just isn't going to get traction, so I have to stay away from these areas, and in some cases it's difficult. So it looks like the dethatcher is really tearing up the grass, but really it's not, because this area right here, all along here, is covered in moss, and you can see it. That's all moss. The good thing about the ground being moist right now is the dethatcher is really pulling up a lot of this moss. If it was dry, I would barely even be touching a lot of this moss. So this is good that it looks like it's torn up, but it's actually going to grow back better, and the grass will actually fill some of these voids where the moss has been removed. Unfortunately, while dethatching, I end up digging up a ton of rocks like these. Between the rain, the voles, and the dethatcher, and a little bit of the aerator, I probably pick up rocks all over the yard, probably 4 or 5 times a year, mostly during spring and into early fall, and then not so much in the winter. I may come out and get some of the big stuff, but the rain's just going to keep washing the rocks up, so I just wait until spring, and then once the grass starts to fill in, there's a little less of the rocks popping up all over the yard. And these rocks will tear up my lawnmower pretty good if I don't get them out, especially when the grass grows, because the rocks will be hidden, and it'll sound like I'm just mowing a field of rocks.